Hey everyone, welcome to devlog number 4, where today I'm going to talk about some of the groups and themes I had come across while looking at world mythologies and stories. Instead of going through, last time we spoke about this big old graph of stories from around the world that I was slowly going through. Instead of walking through that every day, it didn't seem very useful. At least in a devlog kind of style. So instead I've started summarizing and grouping some similar themes that I've come across along the way and put them together. So I started looking at what are the major types of stories that get told. Unsurprisingly, a lot of them start with creation myths, so how the world came to be, how the gods first sort of started, explaining the nature and laws of nature, like day and night, and how they go between each other, seasons, that kind of stuff. A lot of cosmology things in there as well, especially around the sun and the moon. A lot of the creator archetypes are reflected by the sun or the earth or the sky. So just sort of capturing that down. The second bucket I'd filtered things into is just sort of the age of mythical beings and deities, where stories about deities, family trees come up a lot. How do new deities come into being? What do they represent in the world? How do they help form the world itself at a more, pre-human era in terms of like landscape and stuff like that? Then a whole nother bucket is around divine conflict. So usually it's, again, outside the realm of people, but gods playing tricks on one another, getting jealous of one another, going for a coup, the first sort of death, all that sort of divine tragedy style stuff that gets set up there. The fourth was around Age of Heroes, and this is where you start seeing divine influence on humankind. I said divine, I don't necessarily mean strict pantheon sort of situations, but even things like ancestors or guardian spirits helping out somebody on their journey. Boons, curses, gifts. The sort of shift is less around gods and spirits being the main characters, but being supporting parts of a hero's journey, which is another sort of bucket. And the last bucket is around, I wasn't sure how to summarize this, but how do you go from the mythical world to the human world? Why do you not see gods walking around day to day, or spirits in the same way that you would see other people? So there could be things like Ragnarok and the end of the world. It could be them leaving. It could be their spirits being unseen to human eyes anymore. In some of them, there's, going back to that divine conflict, there's war and that resolves. So I've kind of grouped it into these 5 categories. And I've actually started numbering them because I've been thinking a little bit more about the game structure. A couple of days ago, I talked about wanting the game to feel fun on its own, even if you're just doing it by itself. And what I was struggling with there is, if you just tell a whole bunch of isolated stories, nothing resolves, right? There's not this rising tension, or there's not this clear, conflict, climax at the end of a group of stories, and then resolution where you walk away saying, yes, I feel really satisfied with the story we told together. If you're just telling little snippets everywhere, I think it's very useful from a fun world building perspective, but then I don't think it's fun as a game. So I wanted to play around with, how do you structure groups of stories or telling stories so that you have that journey you can go over. And this is where I think those 5 groups are going to play into effect. Like, maybe you start the game just talking about creation myths and setting up the world, setting up who the really big major players are. Then you spend the next sort of act of the game reinforcing that. Who are some more minor characters? How do they have smaller impacts on the world? Step 3 would be setting up some sort of conflict that you want to use and come back to in further stories. Maybe we have that Age of Heroes phase where the gods or deities are less driving a story themselves, but it's more around setting up a lineage, setting up demigods or kings or prophets or something who are major players in society, and using that way to explore more of the society angle. And then the last bit is resolving this story, and this is hopefully where it sounds fun as a conclusion to a game, which ends up with what is the big thing that had happened which had left the world different to when we talked about creation myths and mythical beings. And hopefully that would be a nice way to tie a little ribbon on everything we've been talking about. So that's my broad idea. I still have a whole bunch of research to go, so I am going to keep doing that, add some cards here, think more about, is 5 too many? That sounds like it might be a really long game. Do I want to trim that down or something? And even in this grouping, what do these groupings mean? How do you separate creation myths from divine conflict? When do you want to do that? The game mechanic part is still a big question mark here for me, but I like this idea of telling different sets of stories over time to build up both the world and the narrative conflict within it. So yeah, that's what I was thinking about today. Thanks for following along. Tomorrow I'll probably continue going down this direction and seeing what comes out. Thanks for listening.